Hey people, welcome back to another episode of the Phase podcast. I hope you like the new music. This month, instead of covering a well-being related topic, we're actually going to hear from a young person about their faith. As a Christian charity, our faith is at the core of what we do, wanting to see young lives thrive, having hope and resilience. Joshua, our guest on this episode of the podcast, has done some amazing work with Phase recently, and we thought it would be a great opportunity for him to share what his faith means to him as a young person today. Whether you have a faith or not yourself, I hope you find this discussion interesting and take something from it. Enjoy. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Phase podcast. For this episode of the Wellbeing Waves, I'm joined by a very special guest, Joshua. Josh, I'm incredibly excited to have you on the podcast today. You're a young person who plays an amazing role in some of the work we do at Phase. For our listeners, Josh helps us run Christian Union at Hitchin Boys School and has recently started volunteering for our GROW program as well, helping Year 5 students across Hitchin. Today, Josh, we're actually going to chat about how your faith has impacted you growing up and going through school. But before we go any further, why don't you briefly introduce yourself? So what are you studying at the moment and what are some of your hobbies?
Thanks, James. I'm studying biology, geography and PE at school, and I enjoy lots of sports such as football, tennis, running, golf, going to the gym. But most of all, I love Jesus and spending time with him as well as helping out at church.
Brilliant. Thanks, Josh. And you're actually an Arsenal fan, unfortunately. Probably one of the biggest negatives that you have, I would say, which I suppose that's a compliment.
At least I'm not a United fan.
That is true. And you're into running as well. Can you tell us your 5k PB?
My 5k time, 20 minutes and 14 seconds.
Oh, it's very similar to mine. Yeah, very similar to mine. Getting under that 20 minutes is
tough.
A bit tough. It's tough. Those extra 14 seconds. So, as you said, you love Jesus, you're a Christian, and could you tell us a bit about what your faith means to you, and maybe what and who brought you to church in the first place?
Yeah, so my parents are Christians, and I've been going to church my whole life, really, grown up there and being told about Jesus, but I only really started living for and having a personal relationship with Jesus around 4 years ago, and now my faith is the most important thing to me, as I try, in the strength of the Spirit, to build my life around Jesus, and as 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God.
Just picking up on that point where you said that you kind of grew up your whole life going to church, but it was only, say, 3 or 4 years ago that you actually had a personal relationship with Jesus. Can you remember maybe what happened at that point? What changed from just going to church and, I guess, going because your parents were going to actually having that personal relationship with Jesus yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that a mix of events and people in my life, such as my pastor and his wife, who joined around about that time, have made a huge influence on my faith personally, as well as my siblings' faith. And along with things like, I went to this Christian holiday camp in the Lake District called Capernwray, and it's great there because there's lots of young people and I can get closer to Jesus. And I just think being in an amazing place like that really helped build my faith, along with the support of my family and people at church.
So it sounds like there's kind of multiple points of contact along that journey there, which I think is really important. It's true for a lot of people's journeys. Going on weekends away or to big festivals can have a massive impact on young people's faith and kind of having that encounter, that experience there. But then I think it's also really cool to hear that you have a great relationship with your pastor at your church, and that he's there on that walk with you on that journey, helping you get closer to Jesus. What's it like having faith in school? Do you reckon that affects how you act around school? And is it something you share, you feel confident about in school, or is it something you keep to yourself in that environment?
Yeah, I mean, of course it can be very difficult to be a Christian in such a secular society and secular school setting. But Jesus said in Matthew 5 that we should be salt and light in the world. So we must live radically different to the world in what we think, do and say, such as showing unexpected kindness or going the extra mile to help people, whether at school or wherever we are. Jesus also gave us the Great Commission in Matthew 28:19 to go and make disciples of all nations. Clearly then, we must boldly share our faith as Christians, which I try to do, but often fail. I know it can be scary and embarrassing sometimes to share our faith, but we must pray to be able to share this amazing hope that we have as Christians with others, because we can't do it in our own strength, but only in the Spirit's power.
And it's really cool for me to hear you say that, because I'm actually had the privilege of seeing you share that faith in school. So as I mentioned at the beginning when I introed you, You've actually started to help us run, or you've been part of our Christian Union group at the boys' school now for quite a number of years. But being in year 12 now, you're actually starting to help us lead that group. And seeing you answer some of even your brother's questions or other young people who come along to that group, seeing your answers to their questions and sharing your faith with them, also just joining in with the games and just having fun with the group. I think you do an amazing job of sharing your faith with those in school. So moving on to our next question off the back of that, what actually is Christian Union at the boys' school? We call it Holding Nothing Back, but what does that look like for you? What other youth groups are you maybe involved in outside of school? And what difference does Holding Nothing Back make, but also the other youth groups you're involved in?
Yeah, like you said, James, Holding Nothing Back is the Christian Union that we run at my school. And we try to encourage Christians in their faith, but we also try to share Jesus and the gospel with others that don't yet know him, whilst making it a safe, fun environment to have a laugh, have meaningful conversations, and ask important questions. I'm also part of a joint youth group for my church and another church on Sunday evenings. This offers chances for me to make friends with other Christians that are also my age, whilst also growing closer to Jesus with them.
Amazing. It's so cool to hear about the difference that those groups you're part of make. Some of your peers in school may actually say that your faith is irrelevant these days. We know that growing up as a teenager looks so different to how it did maybe 10 years ago. We have so much going on in our lives, perhaps mobile phones, social media, all of this stuff that can maybe make us feel like there's no need for faith anymore, so many distractions, and we all have so much power in the palm of our hands, in our pockets, in our phones. So what would you say to some of your friends or your peers who might say that faith is irrelevant these days?
Yeah, I think you're right, James. A lot of people just don't show much an interest these days. But the Bible tells us that our choice between following Jesus or rejecting him and living our own way doesn't just affect the present, but also our destination for the rest of eternity. Whether we spend forever in paradise with God or in hell, a place of eternal destruction and pain. Personally, I think it's clearly massively relevant. Knowing Jesus also enables me to have security that even in the tough times, I can know that God works for the good of those who love him, as Romans 8:28 says. Philippians 4:6 and 7 also says that I don't need to be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition and with thanksgiving, I can present my requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard my heart and my mind through Christ Jesus. This just shows me that Jesus gives me that peace better than anything that this world could ever offer, which personally just shows me that faith is so relevant for my life and for the lives of many people.
Wow, that's such a brilliant answer. And I love just picking up on the Philippians verses you touched on there. I think so much of what's going on in teenagers like yourself's lives today brings so much anxiety, be it phones, social media, comparing themselves to their peers all the time. And maybe just so much distraction going on. It's so hard to almost for God to get through to teenagers these days. And so in the peace that's almost the opposite to that anxiety from your relationship with Jesus. I think it's so cool that you know that and you're able to maybe touch on that, share that in your own words and hopefully share that with your peers as well. So I think that's so important and so cool to hear. And actually, just as you said at the end, why Jesus is so relevant today. I think we see in our culture and our society perhaps more of a need for Jesus, and yet we're all so distracted, and it can be really hard to talk about God or talk about Jesus to young people these days. So with that in mind, actually, what do you think the church as a whole could do differently to cater to young people? Perhaps it's something you've seen in your particular church community that your church does really well. And what do you think your place in the church will look like in, say, 10 years' time?
Yeah, for sure. See, personally, I still love being part of the church, despite the lack of some young people. However, I'd obviously love to see more young people at church. And I think that busting the harmful stereotypes of church being long and boring with songs from the Stone Age is a great first step in encouraging young people back to church. Because actually church can be so fun, so rewarding and fruitful, and even with more modern day worship songs. Not that there's anything wrong with the great lyrics of hymns. Another important thing, I think, is the youth events such as Sorted in London, which is a great day full of fun, games, challenges, and lots of Bible teaching and discussions with over 1,000 teenagers. And I think things like that are just so important for bringing people into the church. For me personally, I've felt quite a call over the last couple of years to go into ministry, possibly as a pastor. So I would love to see growth in the church and our passion for Christ and seeing his work in our lives.
This episode of the Phase podcast is sponsored by Hanking Digital and their fantastic Talk online safety card game designed for children and young people, enabling you to have fantastic conversations around digital footprint, cyberbullying, age-appropriate content, fake news, switching off, digital well-being, artificial intelligence, and much, much more. You can get your copy right now at talkonlinesafety.com.
Again, that multiple touch points in what the church can do for young people. So having that idea of being able to go big as a church, having those big youth events like Sorted you mentioned, but then also having fun, exciting stuff that young people can come to every week, where there are people that can invest in young people, walk with young people, and make church exciting and fun, not boring and long for them to come to. And also really cool to hear, as I know we've spoken about recently, that you're actually interested in going into ministry potentially in the future. Could you maybe chat a little bit more about what your dreams are, what your hopes are, what your prayers are for that?
Yeah, so I would just love to be involved in the church, and I felt that God has encouraged me over the last few years through other people and what they've been saying to me. And yeah, I would just like to pray that God would show me and guide me in where He's leading me over the next few years, whether that be to go to Bible school, a Bible college somewhere, and just to study His Word and get to know Him more so that I can hopefully share that with other people, whether in the church or just in all that I do.
Amazing. And you've kind of recently taken some steps into building your skills in terms of ministry as well. I know I mentioned at the start that you help out with our Christian Union and you also volunteer for the GROW program. But you've also recently started doing some youth leader training as well. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so FaZe have been running some training for youth leaders, whether those that have been leading young people for years and years or people that are still youth like me who want to one day lead young people. And I've personally just been able to understand maybe the minds of young people and their thought processes through life, and how we can actually help guide the young people and encourage them to look to Jesus through the tough times in life.
And just moving on from that, so you say that the course has kind of helped you understand how you might share Jesus with young people. You've obviously have current experience of being a young person. Could you tell us, just to finish up, what do you think is the best and worst thing about being a teenager these days?
I think one of the best things is just the many opportunities and all the freedom we have for so many things, whether that's sport, school, things online, at church, etc. But as well as opportunities to make friends for life in so many different places that maybe you can't in other stages of life. I think maybe one of the worst things, however, could be the constant pressure that we have to balance so many things at once, like school, social life, relaxing, and lots more. Like I mentioned earlier, though, being a Christian teenager can actually be one of the hardest, but also the most worth it and best part of people's lives.
Thank you so much, Josh. That's all we've got time for this episode. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and thank you again so much for giving up your free period to come and record a podcast with us today. We've actually got to get over to Christian Union at lunch break. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and rate the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. You can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and YouTube simply by searching for FaZe Podcast. Finally, keep up to date with what's going on at FaZe by following our social media at FaZe Hitchin on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everyone.